A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away,
Star Wars, Eruption on Zerist, A Dawn of the Jedi Tale, 2013, by John Ostrander. A short story originally published in Star Wars Insider number 141. It serves as an introduction to both Hawk Ryo and Lanoree Brock prior to the novel, Dawn of the Jedi, Into the Void. Created and read by the Archivist Publishing. Many millennia before the founding of the old Galactic Republic. It was a wild, turbulent time across the known galaxy, which at that time was centered around the Tython system. More than 10 millennia had now passed since 36,453 BBY, when a call went out from the 8 Thoyor, massive pyramidal starships of unknown origin, each of which had rested abandoned, forgotten, and cloaked in mystery on each of their corresponding 8 planets. Those beings that felt this irresistible call boarded these vessels on each of their respective worlds. And before long, the 8 starships sealed themselves without warning and took off into the vastness of space. In what later became known as the First Migration, the Thoyor then traveled the galaxy and visited many other planets, gathering Wookiees, humans, Twi'leks, Selkath, Cathar, and a number of other Force-sensitive species, before all 8 of these starships traveled to the planet Tython within the deep core. There, the 8 Thoyor had gathered around the 9th and largest Thoyor, which floated above a pinnacle of stone, before the starships scattered themselves across Tython, as the planet was engulfed in a ferocious force storm. The pilgrims had come to realize that they had been brought to Tython to study the Force. Later, they formed the Jedi Order, an order of warriors and scholars whose name was derived from an old Dai Bendu word, meaning mystic center. The transplanted inhabitants of Tython soon learned that the planet reacted violently to any imbalance in the Force, which, over time, resulted in the Jedi developing a philosophy of balance between the light and dark sides of the Force, which they had named after the twin moons of Tython, Bright Ashla and Dark Bogan. Over time, the Jedi came to realize that Tython was unsafe for those who were not sensitive to the Force, and thus all those who could not touch the Force migrated off of the planet and across the Tython system, settling the 10 other worlds in the star system. However, this schism between those that were Force-sensitive and those that were not created an ever-expanding rift between the two groups, across each world, within the various cities and settlements, and even within families. This resentment of the Jedi continued to grow over the millennia, culminating in 25,805 BBY, when the Twi'lek despot Queen Hadia of the planet Shikayakwa began the Despot War in an attempt to conquer the Tython system. Eventually, Queen Hadia was defeated on Tython, but at great cost. The Queen had been killed by Jedi Ranger Dagan Locke, but not before the fighting resulted in more than 100,000 Tython casualties and over 1 million casualties amongst the despot army, as well as the countless thousands of injured and displaced across each of the worlds within the Tython system. The scars of the Despot War still remained fresh for many, ensuring that tension across the Tython system remained high, even 12 years later, in 25,793 BBY. As a result, the Jedi Council had dispatched Jedi Rangers across the Tython system to mitigate this tension, as well as undertake official missions on behalf of the Order. As representatives of the Jedi Council, these Rangers were the public face of the Order off-world and were stationed across the settled worlds to resolve conflicts and prevent war. Thus, the Jedi Rangers became keepers of the peace across the Tython system, interceding when necessary, and guided by the Force, dispensing justice as they saw fit. Most recently, Jedi Rangers Hawk Ryo and Lanoree Brock had been dispatched to the moon Zerist, which orbited the planet Obri, a dark world far from the light of Tythos. Zerist was illuminated only from the shine of Obri and remained in perpetual twilight. Most of the settlements on the volcanic moon were situated along the bases of mountains, where settlers could easily funnel heat into their homes, as well as quickly take shelter should the need arise. The volatile nature of the moon gave rise to government systems tasked with managing the evacuation of populated areas threatened by volcanic eruptions, which occurred frequently on Zerist. Beneath the surface of the moon were vast underground seas, illuminated by bioluminescent minerals in vaulted caverns. The wealthiest settlers of Zerist established their homes on islands within these warm subterranean ecosystems, in close proximity to the headquarters and executive offices of the moon's prominent mining companies and their various affiliates. The two Jedi Rangers had been tasked with mediating a settlement between Dessain Mining and its workers before the negotiations erupted into widespread violence across the moon. Given the volatile nature of the situation, the Jedi Rangers approached it from two angles. While Lanoree Brock publicly mediated the dispute, Hawk Ryo covertly investigated any underlying issues which could impact its outcome. What they discovered could also be felt as a chill through the Force by both of them. A nefarious plot intended to completely derail the negotiations, with the intention of destabilizing Dessain Mining, along with all operations on Zerist. This left the two Jedi with little time to unravel and then thwart the plot before it was too late. Hawk Ryo drifted in and out the shadows, a shadow himself. The moon world, Zerist, was located far from the sun, and most of the available light was reflected off the gas giant, Obri, around which the moon orbited. Canaan was typically bustling with activity, but the workers' town was now deserted. Like all the surface towns on Zerist, Canaan was located near an active volcano for its much-needed warmth, despite the risk of occasional eruptions. The authorities usually predicted the eruptions in time and evacuated the threatened areas, just as they had recently done with Canaan. No one was left in the town except Hawk. In theory. In reality, the Jedi Ranger spotted two figures atop the flat-roofed building less than a kilometer away. Only 5 stories high, it was still the tallest building in the area. They were Twi'leks, like himself, and armed. Hawk opened his comm and called his partner. Lanoree Brock decided that the surroundings were beautiful. Underground seas flowed throughout large caverns smoothed over time. High vaulted ceilings encrusted with natural minerals gave off enough light to create a twilight effect. It was no surprise as to why the rich of Zerist chose to live in these warm caverns instead of the cold surface of the moon. The calm on the island almost lent itself to meditation. It was peaceful. The negotiations were definitely not. The management of Dessain Mining and its laborers were now shouting at one another, and ill will was building. Lanoree was having difficulty maintaining balance between the light and the dark sides of the Force, as she had learned. Management consisted entirely of the extended Dessain family, headed by Oma Dessain, the tall, pale patrician head of the clan. The workers, human and alien, were led by short, weather-beaten Brom Santis, and demanded a voice in daily company operations. Each day, the workers left Zerist and labored on the gas mining operations floating around Obri. The pay was steady, if not generous, but it was a hard life.
For their part, the Dessains were loath to cede control to anyone who was not family.
The solution, it was decided, would be a marriage between Brom Santis, Arco's oldest son, and Oma Dessain, Emin's youngest daughter. Brom would become part of the Dessain family and a voice for the workers. Lanoree had been assigned the role of negotiator, and though it wasn't the solution she would have suggested, If it satisfied all parties concerned, then it satisfied her.
That was before Oma Dessain vanished.
Each side blamed the other for her disappearance. Work at Dessain Mining had halted. Tempers flared and open-class warfare looked not only possible, but likely. The Jedi Council on Tython had sent the 2 Jedi Rangers to prevent violence and find the girl. The Ranger swung her long legs out of the chair, turning away from all the shouting. "Please tell me you found the girl."
I may have found her.
Hawk replied.
I went to the spaceport to check who arrived or left around the time of the kidnapping. I discovered a Shikak-1 ship registered to Baron Volnos Arayo.
"Your brother?"
My brother, the crime lord.
Lanoree could picture Hawk's lips twisting in distaste.
He owns interests in the mining operations on Obris 2 or the Moons, but has never been able to get a foothold within Dessain Mining. One of the ways to increase the value of one's own holdings is to decrease the value of a rival's holdings. Are you growling?
Maybe. Will Oma still be alive?
Her body has not been found, so it's likely she lives. If they intend to kill her, it will be when both sides are at each other's throats.
Which will be soon.
You must keep them from reaching the boiling point. I think I have spotted where Oma is being held, but you cannot say anything until I know for sure. I'll let you know what I find. Keep the workers and management from killing each other.
Right. You get the easy job.
The Force be with you.
Lanoree turned back to the round wooden table and narrowed her gray eyes. Both sides were already at the breaking point. Violence was ready to erupt. But Lanoree had a theory. Sometimes the best way to cut off violence was to use it first. Her right hand dropped to the slug thrower at her hip. She didn't often carry one, she rarely needed one. But something told her to wear one today. If there's one thing Lanoree learned through her experience, it was to listen to her instincts. With one fluid move, she aimed the slug thrower straight up over her head and fired 3 bursts into the ceiling. The arguing stopped dead, and all eyes went to the auburn-haired ranger. Jedi were mysterious beings to most of the sentience of the settled worlds. They went where they willed and intervened where they chose, or, they claimed, as the Force directed. They had strange powers and were both respected and feared. Right now, Lanoree was feared. Good. That meant she had their attention. The slug thrower still in her hand, the Jedi Ranger sat back in her chair, placing the weapon on the table before her. The barrel pointed at the now silent delegation. She spoke quietly.
The last time I was a negotiator was on Skalgora. Before I was done, forests were ablaze, and one of the parties was dead.
She leaned forward.
I was hoping these negotiations would go smoother.
In truth, the deaths in the burning forests on Skalgora haunted Lanoree. The negotiators here on Zerist, however, didn't need to know that.
Perhaps we should begin again,
she suggested in a low murmur. They did, quietly, and with nervous glances in her direction. He moved through the streets unnoticed, which was not a particularly difficult task, given the dim light and the now near-continuous rumbling sounds emitting from the volcano, which the settlement abutted. A particularly violent tremor, followed by a long, deep rumble, shook the ground beneath the Jedi, the force of which passed through him like a wave and could be felt down to his bones. Certain he hadn't been seen by anyone, Hawk Ryo reached the side of the 5-story building. Its exterior was now laced with cracks and heavily scarred where portions of its facade had been shaken free from the structure, a testament to the violence of the tremors emanating from the mountain. It would not be long now. He must act quickly. He glanced upward.
One guard was directly above him, and the other would be across the roof. It was vital that he silence both before they could give alarm, assuming the girl was alive.
The ranger brought his sword out of its sheath with barely a whisper, holding it in his right hand as he let the balance within him slip into the dark side. Hawk knew the dark side well. He dwelled too deeply in it once, and it got him sent to Bogan, a moon of Tython where those who drifted too far to the dark side were sent by the Jedi Council for solitary reflection and meditation until they returned to the balance. Right now, he needed to use aggression, however, which meant channeling the dark side. He eased into it with a comfortable familiarity, while he crouched and then leaped straight upward, letting the Force carry him. Hawk cleared the edge of the roof, right in front of the very surprised Twi'lek guard, and without hesitation slashed his sword across the guard's neck. He died silently. The other guards sensed something amiss and started to turn. Hawk gestured with the Force and pulled him across the roof. The guard gasped for a moment before being impaled on the ranger's sword. Their eyes met, and Hawk recognized him. Dion A'arla, one of his brother's personal guards. A'arla's eyes registered recognition as well, and then life faded from them. Hawk felt his death in the Force, and part of him, the part that fed on the dark side, felt deep satisfaction. The ranger let the body slide off his sword and took a deep breath, centering himself again in the balance. It was tempting for Hawk to just stay in the dark side as he had once before. It was seductive, but dangerous. Hawk found a stairway in the middle of the roof leading down into the building and descended cautiously. 2 floors down were 2 large rooms on either side of the stairwell, the doors left wide open in the haste of the evacuation. At first blush, they appeared to have been used as dormitories for workers that were unmarried. Cots were overthrown, and debris littered the floor. Hugging the stairway wall, Hawk glanced through the doorway and found Oma. The girl was bound and gagged on a cot next to the wall opposite the door. A large and surly-looking Twi'lek stood guard, a slug thrower at the ready, but he was looking at the far end of the room. Focusing his senses through the Force, the Jedi heard 2 more Twi'leks at the other end of the dormitory. Neither sounded happy.
Thought this would be over by now.
You got other things to do?
Other than sit next to a Sokar volcano, yes.
The problem is that Jedi's sitting at the table. Not for long, though. Our contact will take care of her. Then we just off the girl, leave the corpse where it can be found, and get out of here.
Hawk couldn't risk calming a warning to Lanoree. His best bet was to settle things here and hope his fellow ranger was still alive. However, the moment he made a move, the 2 guards at the end of the room would see him, and the guard closest to Oma would certainly kill her. He needed a diversion. As if on cue, the volcano provided a spectacular one. Ahead of schedule, the eruption started with a deafening clap of thunder, followed by an ear-splitting explosion. As plumes of pumice, flaming ash, and molten lava were belched high into the air. As the shockwave tore through the town, their building was shaken so violently that it almost toppled to one side. Its occupants were showered with debris and fragments dislodged from the walls and ceiling, and as the entire building lurched to one side, the Twi'leks were slammed against the wall, losing their footing in the process. All save the Jedi, who managed to maintain his balance after dropping briefly to one knee. Everyone was stunned for a moment, but then Hawk Ryo moved. His sword in his right hand and a long knife in his left, he swept into the room. Hurling the knife toward the guard standing next to Oma, he guided it with the Force into the Twi'lek's neck. The guard's finger tightened on the trigger of his slug thrower as he dropped. The shot went wild, but was audible even over the roaring volcano. Hawk pivoted toward the 2 other guards and sped toward them as they turned to the source of the slug fire and spotted him. A moment for their reaction, a few steps for Hawk. A moment as they brought their slug throwers around, Another few steps. They aimed their weapons. Hawk threw himself into a forward roll beneath their shots and pushed off of one leg as he came forward and up. Flipping in midair over the guards, the Jedi shoved his boot down hard into the upturned face of the one to his right. Nosebone and cartilage cracked as the Twi'lek fell backward. The Jedi landed, spun, and thrust his sword into the fallen Twi'lek's chest. A quick and clean kill. His partner kept firing, but always where the Jedi had been. Hawk landed in a crouch and, with a gesture of his hand, delivered a force blow that sent his target backwards through the window. The Twi'lek's scream was covered by the volcano's roar. Given the option, Hawk preferred not to kill, but now there was no time and no other choice. Still, the dark side within him exulted, and he struggled to center himself in the balance. Hawk squatted next to Oma.
I'm Jedi Ranger Hawk Rio, and I've been sent here to rescue you. Try to be calm.
Picking up the teen, Hawk lifted her over one shoulder and raced to the rooftop. Superheated volcanic debris rained down everywhere as the wooden buildings started to burn. Again, Hawk Rio tried to warn Lanoree, but the swirling maelstrom of ash blocked his signal. Blinded by the billowing ash storm, Ranger Rio tightened his grip on Oma and moved forward. Calling on the Force once again, he leaped to the next nearest roof. Ran across it and jumped to the next roof after that. He could barely breathe now, and each jump was blind. But he trusted in the Force to guide him and lead them out of danger. And that Lanoree was not dead. Lanoree Brock eased back into her chair. The negotiations were still going nowhere, but at least everyone was being civil. A servant brought her a goblet of wine, a Vasamin red, a variety she had developed a taste for whilst on Skagora. Lanoree raised the goblet to her lips and paused. She knew the bouquet of this wine well. Something bitter underlay the aroma. Lanoree turned her head to glance at the servant who had given it to her. A nervous little man, as old as Oma Dessain. Fear came off him like a wave, a bitter aroma of its own. The servant turned to run. Lanoree caught him with the Force, lifted him up, and threw him onto the round table. Thrusting the glass in his face, Lanoree whispered,
I think this vintage is off. Please, taste it.
The man's eyes went wide as he babbled incoherently. Lanoree growled,
Drink it, little man, or I will make you drink it.
She didn't have that ability, but it was a common belief that the mysterious Jedi could control one's mind. That fear, that superstition, sometimes served the Jedi almost as well as the Force. The servant certainly believed the stories.
No, it's poisoned,
he blurted. Lanoree folded her arms, keeping her eyes on her would-be assassin.
Master Dessain, you have a traitor in your midst. The kidnappers would have needed someone on the inside to reach your daughter. That traitor is this man.
Oma Dessain looked at his servant, appalled.
Betolo, all these years you have been a trusted servant, almost a member of the family. Why?
Because all these years and I have only been a servant, never a member of the family.
Betolo said quietly.
I only wanted to have something of my own before I died. A chance to leave this wretched rock.
Dessain's voice seethed with fury.
Where is my daughter, Betolo?
With any luck, dead, my lord.
Lanoree's calm buzzed.
With any luck, my lord, she is not,
she said as she activated her comm.
Hawk?
Lanoree, someone is going to...
Yes, I know. He tried and failed. Is Oma Dessain with you?
She is. But we have another problem.
What do you mean you refuse to marry Brom Santis?
Eamon, while relieved to have his daughter back, was furious. Oma Dessain stood alongside Hawk Rio and the two delegations on the island within the cavern. She, like him, was covered with ash, making her pale skin even whiter and powdering her dark hair the same hue. Free from her bonds, she stood glaring defiantly at her father. Oma's chin jutted out.
What I mean is, I won't marry him. No one asked me if I wanted to get married. I don't and I won't.
You have your duty to the family.
I don't know this, Brom. I don't love him, and I won't marry him to settle some dispute.
This set off another round of arguing between father and daughter, with Santis pitching in.
This is breaking down quickly,
Hawk murmured. Actually, my sympathies are with the girl. She shouldn't be a clause in a treaty, Lanoree murmured back.
If she does not relent, the negotiations will likely collapse, and everything we've done will be for nothing.
I think I may have another solution, Lanoree said. First, I'll need their attention. She shot her slug thrower 3 times into the air. And again with the same effect. Very pleasantly, Lanoree spoke. In other parts of the solar system, rival interests have a practice called fostering. I suggest you try it. Oma would become a foster child in the Santis household, and Brom would be the same with the Dessains. Each would be treated as a full member of the family they are with. They would spend 6 months with one family and 6 months with the other. The workers would have a voice through Brom, and Oma would learn firsthand about the workers' lives.
I think this is a very reasonable suggestion,
Hawk added, equally pleasant. But the expressions on the 2 Jedi firmly suggested that all sides accept the deal. Oma looked pleased. At least she wasn't getting married. Details were worked out, Hawk cleaned up, and the 2 Jedi met at the spaceport to take leave of Zerist and of each other. The Council has summoned me back to Tython for a special mission, Lanoree said. It's been 4 years since I've been back. It's time.
I'm heading out to Fury's Gate,
replied Hawk. It was the outermost planet in the system. Great generation ships left from the small world, seeking a path through the maze that was the core, and looking for ways back to the rest of the galaxy. The settled worlds jointly maintained a station there.
I like to look out into the stars and meditate,
he said. A small shadow passed over Lanoree's face. My brother used to look out at the stars and wonder if there was a way back to the rest of the galaxy. He was never very happy on Tython, she said softly. She was quiet for a moment, then shook it off and said, It was good working with you, Ranger Ryo. I look forward to the chance to do it again. Hawk nodded.
I do too, Ranger Brock. The Force be with you.
Lanoree smiled. And you, she replied.
The Jedi then crossed to their waiting ships, and Hawk Rio paused briefly to watch Lanoree Brock take off into the star-flecked skies and reflect upon his brother's latest activities. Even though Hawk Ryo was proud of his heritage, he no longer associated with his family, Clan Ryo, a notorious crime syndicate and one of the ruling families of crime lords on his homeworld of Shikakwa. As the youngest of 3 sons, he had always looked up to his 2 older brothers who had been steadfast examples of loyalty and honor to him throughout his youth, regardless of his family's syndicate background. His father, the Baron, and his eldest brother had refused to pledge their allegiance to the despot Queen Hadia as a point of honor, even with the threat of death looming over them. Each of the 9 houses had always answered to the Overlord, but each house had also doggedly maintained their independence, and along with the heads of the other houses, had loosely formed a governing body over Shikakwa. This structure had been in place for countless generations, and was guaranteed by each of the 9 families' bloodlines. Then Queen Hadia had taken power and become Overlord. Her gambit to unite the 9 ruling clans into one house and one bloodline, her bloodline, was madness. Then the despot queen had both his father and eldest brother executed. Overcome with a flood of memories and their associated emotions, each intertwined with the seductive touch of the dark side, Hawk Ryo paused in his reflections for a moment and took a deep breath, centering himself again in the balance before daring to return to his musings. Next in the line of succession, Volnos Ryo had become the new Baron of Clan Ryo, a role for which, by his own admission, he was unprepared. Having never expected to lead, he had spent his youth living lavishly off of his wealth, traveling and studying across the settled worlds of the Tython system. Upon his elevation to Baron, one of his first acts was to pledge allegiance to the Despot Queen in order to avoid his father and brother's fate. This pledge had caused an uproar within Clan Ryo, with many considering it an act of betrayal, a perspective that Hawk Ryo had also shared at that time. When it was revealed that Volnos Ryo's pledge had been a ploy to hide his true agenda, revenge for the death of his relatives, he had gained the full support of Clan Ryo, even as his duplicitous nature was revealed to Hawk. To add insult to injury, Volnos Ryo had instigated the assassination of Queen Hadia at the hands of Jedi Dagon Locke, Hawk Ryo's closest friend. Had his brother's selfish manipulation of his friend been the beginning of Dagon Locke's slide towards imbalance and the dark side? Had Hawk Ryo's own imbalance been driven by feelings of guilt for being unable to prevent Dagon's actions and subsequent deterioration? With a firm hold on his emotions to remain in the balance, Hawk Ryo probed deeper into his memories of the events over the last year. As he did so, it became increasingly clear that as Volnos Ryo continued on his own downward spiral, it was having a profound and negative effect on those around him. Jedi Dagon Locke, Volnos' former wife, Jedi Temple Master Korra Ryo, Hawk's niece, Jedi Journeyor Tasha Ryo, and even himself. He realized that he should have spoken to Lanoree about his musings. There just wasn't any time between the volatile Dessain Mining negotiations and then the mysterious disappearance of Oma Dessain. Lanoree always understood him, even his surrender to occasional fits of deep rage. Or at least, she accepted them. Yes, he decided. Ranger Brock could definitely be of assistance to him with this matter. More importantly, she would insist on providing her support. Still, Hawk Ryo needed to ensure any assistance Lanoree provided did not result in any negative consequences for her. He would meditate further on this matter when he arrived at Fury's Gate. As he engaged the engines of his heavily modified Hunter-class starfighter and quickly accelerated out of Zerist's atmosphere and raced into the stars. One thought was clear to him. He must do something about Volnos Ryo and his insidious influence over those that were closest to him. But that is a tale for another time. This unabridged audiobook was developed 100% using artificial intelligence to generate realistic and familiar voices.